Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for another session of this very special event, The Sacred Wound as a Portal to Your Awakening, where we are learning how to embrace the dark night of the soul. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Charlie Giles, and I am honoured to be your host for this very powerful wisdom sharing event. Today's session, we are talking to the lovely Natalia O'Sullivan, all the way from the UK. Let me tell you a little bit about Natalia. She is a renowned healer, a holistic therapist, a spiritual counsellor with over 30 years of experience. She's dedicated her life to helping people overcome past trauma caused by family history and inherited biological and mental health and negative emotions using a combination of ancient wisdom and modern psychological techniques. Her private clinic in London and Los Angeles attracts clients from all over the world, and her work has helped countless individuals to find healing, peace, and spiritual growth. Natalia's work has been featured in several best-selling books, including Soul Rescuers, which she co-authored with her husband Terry, and The Ancestral Continuum, which she wrote with Nicola Graydon. She is also the author of Do It Yourself, Psychic Power and Mind Power, both of which offer practical advice for developing psychic abilities and unlocking the full potential of the mind. With her honours degree in psychology and a mastery of various holistic arts, Natalia is a true expert in her field, and her approach is sure to inspire and enlighten anyone seeking to deepen their spiritual journey. She co-founded Soul Rescuers with her husband Terry O'Sullivan back in 1991, teaching sacred healing techniques, soul rescue and ancestral healing around the world. And they live in Somerset, England. So please welcome Natalia O'Sullivan for today's topic, Unveiling the Gifts and Trauma of Our Feminine Lineage. Hi, Natalia.
Hi, Charlie. Lovely to be here to have a chat with you about my favourite subject.
Yes, I am too. We spoke earlier about what a great topic it is, and I think we at some point realized we could probably talk about it for a very long time. So I'm wondering if you could kind of kick off with this idea of the relationship with your maternal lineage and how that can really help address the traumas and gifts from your family heritage.
Yes, I've always wondered where to begin this very vast subject. And I thought the best thing to do, let's talk about the fact that we've all been birthed by a woman, by our mothers.
Definitely.
Whether we know these mothers or not, which means whether we remain with our biological mothers or we are adopted, or our mothers pass away, there is still a very strong sense of that we have this strong relationship with our maternal line. So that's fine. We begin the story with our conception and with our birth, and that's how we start to awaken our relationship with the feminine. So within that, rather than go too biological, because as we know that when we're in our mother's wombs, that we basically develop our own fertility there. So our eggs are developed during the mother's womb, and therefore we talk a lot about, how we epigenetically inherit a lot of not just biological, but a lot of emotional energy from our maternal line comes from this inheritance. So what I'd like to do is just really talk about how we begin the story of how we feel within ourselves as women and as men, and then also then later on as mothers, as daughters, as siblings, and then as grandmothers. It begins with that story. So sometimes we're not always lucky to begin the story in a very welcoming way. So sometimes we feel very abandoned or rejected, or, in many cases, sometimes our mums are not sure about their relationship with our fathers, or we're not sure about our own status and security in life. So we start to absorb how our mother feels when we're in the womb. The second stage of when we begin, because I thought we'd start off talking very briefly about how we inherit, and then we can talk about how we have choices. So, because I think that's also important, because we're not really just a blank piece of paper. We've just come in, we've just drawn in all the energy of our mother's emotions and physicality. We're also coming in with our own personality, and that's a very important part of unveiling our feminine line. So what we're going to do is just say, right, we've been born and this is how our mothers welcomed us. So we are healthy and well, or loved, or we've had a very traumatic birth. Then we enter into life. So we begin the story either very positively, so we're very kind of feeling very in gratitude, or we begin the story with a little bit of trauma and anxiety. So whatever we begin with, what I've also noticed as we journey through life is that the core of who we are is the one that knows how to navigate everything that happens to us. So I always want to say to people, so, you know, if it's been very traumatic in your relationship with your mother or your grandmother, and this space that you've been brought into, you never forget that within yourself, you have this, your own innate core as a human being. So every experience you have, so the imprint, whether it's very positive or negative, we have the power to transform that. So if we're talking about how we unveil the gifts of the feminine lineage, we've also got to look at the strengths and the characteristics within our maternal line. And what you'll find is that whatever's happened to our mothers and our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers, that you would discover that their experiences also began according to how they were birthed, where they were born, who they were born through, what number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15, and 20. I recently met this young man who is the 20th child of this one mother, and he's only 36 years old. So you can imagine that, you know, his journey has been very interesting. But the point of this feminine lineage is actually to say to yourself, you know, don't always look at the real negativity that your grandmother and your great-grandmothers have experienced, but also let's look at the essence that they brought in, which you have a little bit of as well. So I kind of want to say as well, to wondering, we know that we're born, we know that we have our essence, which is our, I call it our spirit, our kind of core being that navigates through all our experiences. I think the other thing that's very briefly to talk about how we bring in the maternal line is also, it's to do with culture. It's to do with the country you've been born into. It's also the language that your family speak, how you eat, how you drink, how you kind of have your community also brings up a lot of this really strong maternal energy within your life. So this is where we learn how to cook, how to take care of ourselves, you know, how we are also, how do we love, how we learn not to love or communicate. So we're, again, it's like this, like it reminds me of a garden. You're sort of bedding in to lots of different experiences. And culturally, I noticed that with all the years of doing this work, that has a huge influence on, if we're talking about the maternal line, on how people exist, you know, how you're taught everything from the very beginning and how you feel, how you exist in your community. So again, that's the, to me, that's the second stage of drawing in, a bit like you are a little garden and you also have all these plants, you draw in some of these strengths and some of this understanding from those experiences. Now, unfortunately, what happens to some people as they go through the first few years of their life, they realize from their core that they're unhappy about this relationship they have with the maternal line. So how they relate to their mother, adopted or biological, how their mother related to their grandmother, how the community responds to do with this nurturing, this idea of the mother. So that's the beginning of us trying to learn, do we separate from those stories and create our own lineage and how we want to exist, or do we battle? This is when the problems start to happen, is when we start to fight against the idea of how our mother wants to exist in the family relationship. And that's when some of these wounds and these traumas start to kind of what I call make us fall apart. So, you know, and I could go on, but I kind of want to stop here for a minute just to think about how we're going to explain for someone to kind of go, well, you know, how do I know I'm happy or unhappy about my relationship with my mother? How do I know that what I feel is actually a truth, or it's something that I'm rebelling against that's maybe all right for me? So this is when we get into some difficult issues, because we have to understand that our relationship with the mother doesn't always come in this perfect Walt Disney experience. So we then start to feel very disappointed. And that is how we then need to then challenge how we awaken our understanding of our relationship. So this is when we were talking about how we develop our I call it the developmental psychology of how we start to awaken. There's certain periods in our life, particularly not just when we're very small, but it's to do with brain development. So you have this period around about 7, 8, when your brain, actually your two hemispheres start to come together. My biology is keeping it simple. So what happens then is that we start to kind of have realizations, how we fit in at school, how do we fit in our community, how do we feel in our bodies. So a lot of the questions start to rise up inside us about actually who we are, and does it fit into the community that we've been brought into. Lots of children at that age and before suddenly feel very not uncomfortable. So this often is a time where suddenly the awakening pre-puberty, we start to awaken the idea that we might be neurodiverse, we might be bringing in a bit of dyslexia, autism, ADD. We also are bringing in the points that we are now wanting to rebel against a little bit of somehow our relationship with the feminine, because we're not always super comfortable with how maybe our mothers relate to us. Sometimes we're very loved and supported, but sometimes we're not. And the big rebellion, I call it, happens during puberty. So I would say as soon as that puberty hits in strong, right up to for about 5 years afterwards, this is when we are then pushing either totally against the maternal line, or we are suggesting that we want to bring in a stronger identity within that relationship. And then it goes on.
It's so interesting. Yeah, no, I'm thinking not only of my own daughter, teenager, but myself as well. And just that where you don't even, it's really coming from within, isn't it? Because you're not logically saying, I'm going to push against you now, or I'm going to rebel against it, or I'm going to take you. It becomes a natural process, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think more so the stronger you are within your self, the more it sounds like, why is one person completely compliant and why another person says, I'm not sure this is actually okay. So often people who look to heal their ancestral lineage have these questions again. I'm not 100% convinced that this was the right way to feed me, to love me, to nurture me. So this is when we go, I'm just going to fight a little bit. Now, the crisis often comes after those 5 years when you ask yourself, how do I then navigate myself within the world to feel I can be loved? If I was taught when I was small, as soon as I argue, as soon as I show any anger or emotion, or if I want to speak the truth, or if I've got a bit of personality, or if I'm just quiet and gentle and I don't want to be like the rest of the family, how do you accept yourself? And during your 20s, I always think that is one of the most challenging decades where you're emerging. And you're emerging with either a very full bag of love and confidence, or you've got an empty bag that you're trying to fill. And this is when we begin to navigate our relationships with people. So intimate relationships, how we experience love, what we think that will make us happy or satisfied. And therefore, I say it's the maternal issue, but you could say it's also how we relate to our fathers as well. But also, if we think about how the women within our family, how they experience love. And I think that's one of the most important things to talk about, the gifts and the trauma of being in the maternal line. How did they experience love? And so interesting with my lovely mum, she basically lost her father when she was very young. During the Spanish Civil War, he was executed. So there was an absence. She often talked about, although she was the youngest of 3 girls, she often talked about trying to find her mother a husband, because she knew all her friends had husbands. So what was interesting, when she married my dad, she said to me, I'm not equipped to know how to be a wife because I've never seen it, because she was 1. So often she said that she stumbled around trying to navigate her relationship, but she had an extremely powerful relationship with her sisters and with her mother. So her idea of community and feeling loved and supported was a very strong female identity. But when it came to her relationships with men, there was quite a crisis often. So I'm just using her because it's close to me rather than, but I think if we just say to ourselves, if we have a moment, say, right, so I was born like this, I was loved, not loved. I was supported and then I wasn't supported, or how did that experience? We often manifest these relationships during our first relationship, so in our 20s, say. And that is when we often make the worst decisions. Or, yeah, exactly. Oh, you kind of go, oh, I'm so lucky I met the love of my life. And then suddenly, as we go through the journey of life, you then, you wonder if that was the love of your life as you get older. But the point is, that is where we navigate our relationship with love. And that, again, is something that comes from, how did the women in your family, so generations back, how was their relationship? How was their intimacy? Although you think, how can I ask my grandmother, how was her intimacy?
I know.
but you kind of feel it in your heart. And you can also tell the happy or unhappy relationships, whether they were friends, whether they fell in love. Also, often, sometimes I've seen family lineages where the women were forced to marry for money, for legacy, for situation, for desperation. And therefore, what happens, it breeds this level of irritation and anger mixed up with the need for intimacy and love. So we then become confused about, what is healthy, what is unhealthy, because we're not sure.
It's just so interesting. And I'm thinking of, again, it's making me think of my relationships but you're so right. It's that, you see how you don't realize you're doing it, but you're seeing the energy of the relationships that you're in and around and that you're raised with. And regardless of what they're saying, whether they're together or whatever, you're actually really picking up on the energy of either mum's frustrated or dad's angry, or, mum's wishing she was not in this situation, even though, oh, we're staying together for the kids, and, those kinds of things. And it teaches you this different understanding of what love's meant to feel like, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think, again, what we do is when we are at a moment, maybe this is, we're talking before having children, if you have children, you're also at the moment where you're saying to yourself, right, Kate, I would say to those of you who are watching this, who are in that stage, is that I think sometimes we don't give ourselves time just to have a think, to reflect, to empower ourselves, to say, is this an okay experience? Do I have to remain codependent? Do I have to remain kind of, accepting certain levels of respectful relationships? So it's very interesting. And I kind of want to also to say to people, it's all right to make mistakes. Sometimes we forget that we can, as soon as we forgive ourselves or actually see what we're doing, we can turn things around. So I'm simplifying it because sometimes people have been very traumatized during their childhood. That takes a little bit longer for them to be not making the same mistakes or running towards relationships that are unhealthy. But I would say, if we're looking at the feminine lineage, just have a look back. And often you've got to realize that these women aren't born to be mean-spirited or men-hatred or kind of not loving their kids. Things have happened to them. And I say there's a lot of forgiveness that comes from understanding that your mother or your grandmother or whoever looks after you as a female, they have their own story. And not everybody can actually be very honest or heal some of the things that have happened to them.
Right. And so what would you, like, if you're someone who's listening to this and you're kind of trying to think about, how has your life been affected by these different things? How would it show up? What would it look like? Is there some kind of way that people could reflect on that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about relationships before,
okay.
And I'd like a little bit of time to talk about what it's like to navigate as a parent.
Okay.
Well, so that is in a minute. So
okay.
if we're reflecting how we experience love and intimacy, it's kind of important for people to then work out, is this okay for me? And that is the beginning of, when you realize that something is uncomfortable, is the beginning of you saying to yourself, what is it that you need to navigate in your relationships, whether you're with somebody or not, is how you experience love. So if you're somebody who's always chasing to be loved, always going back to the same experience time and time again that makes you cry or feel brokenhearted or dissatisfied, and there's a repeat of behaviors that come from these relationships, and it doesn't matter whether it's whatever type of relationship you're having, is that you will be repeating those experiences. And then I would say you have to give yourself time to stop and ask yourself, okay, where are these stories coming from? So often I just ask people to go and get some of the, if you're lucky to get some pictures of when you were little, it's amazingly powerful when you see pictures of yourself. Now, most people, maybe at 2 or 3, are still very gutsy. You've got lots of face, like very strong baby faces. But it's interesting, as we go through the 6 to 9, we begin to understand whether we are okay within our community, within our family. There's a question that comes up. So I would say to you, ask yourself, how do you experience love between 6 and 10? To say to yourself, how did I feel love? What does love feel for me? Is this a healthy love? How do I navigate myself? Now, what happens as we get a little bit older and we go through our puberty, what we do then is that we are in that terrible, terrible stage where we are looking for sexual pleasure. We're very smelly. We're growing out of shape. We don't know how we fit into our community. We're not sure who we are. I would judge yourself very little during that time, because often we come through that and we are reborn in our 20s. So that part of us is kind of raw and wild. And I would say that there needs to be a beginning of this forgiveness and this lovingness that needs to come into that young person that we once were during that period. And 13 to 18 is pivotal to understanding how comfortable we feel in our bodies about who we are. Now, if you're still in navigation process, I call it, through your 20s into your 30s, there gets to a point where you need to kind of understand what it is that you are now looking for. So I often call these transitions that we experience. So every time you kind of a breakup, you can reflect back and ask yourself, how did I do that well? And what do I need to understand? Now, that's all well and good. But if we're going back to the idea of how we're unveiling the gifts and trauma of our feminine lineage, so love is one strand, one root. So remember, we are a plant in a beautiful garden. So one of these roots is, how do we deal with love? The other root is, how do we deal with intimacy, which is about sexuality, about who we are within our bodies, how we can experience really just not just pleasure, but sharing who we are with people. The third strand is deciding. Sometimes people have had that decision taken from them, but some people then decide they'd like to have children. Now, when we go into this big experience of becoming a mother or a father, that is when this lineage opens up wide. Because, of course, it's a biological experience. You've got your womb, or you've got your, basically, even as a man, you're reflecting how you related to your mother. You don't realize that, but you go, right, I'm going to begin to want to be a parent. So the beginning of that story normally starts very well. And then there is this moment that as your child gets a little bit older, there is a moment where, whenever the time you were a little bit traumatized, rejected, hurt, you could have had an accident, your father could have died, you know, these big stories, or you're actually kind of very anxious during the, say, at 6 or at 10, you then begin to reflect, that child will reflect back to you, this lineage. And then suddenly you're in trouble. What it feels like, I can't cope with them. They're making me exhausted. I'm feeling really anxious. I'm having panic attacks. I'm da-da-da. The child then looks at you and goes, oh, okay, so she's having a breakdown. I'm going to show up by really being resistant. So I'm going to play out a little bit more because I can feel that there is an issue going on coming out of one of my parents. This is when, you know, then you have a little bit of family dynamic happening. So I would say at those moments, again, take time, sit back and ask yourself, what is going on in your relationship with the child? What are you remembering? What is happening? And then again, so talk about the lineage. When you go back into your ancestry, you then realize there's pivotal points where it feels like patterns repeat themselves. So if your father died at 10, you might find that your grandmother's father died at 10. There's a repeat of some traumas that happen. So I often say, look back, but look at what's happening today, because there's often this mirroring that goes on. And those that are really, really able to give themselves time, it's like that. I will look at this. I will forgive that. There's lots of really amazing things you can do if you just trust that you can change the process, that you are here as the legacy to be different. That is also part of, I think, it's unveiling the gifts. It's not just how strong your grandmother was or how powerful or creative or clever, but it's also these strength of characters that you also will reflect, but also is what you leave behind. You give your children the opportunity to see yourself change some very traumatized experiences or behaviors. So if you're an alcoholic, or you self-soothe, or you abandon your family frequently, or you disappear, even those, I've seen mothers that can just disappear by just not even responding. So they go within, it's almost too much, because we then disappear in. So your child can pick up immediately, you start to heal. And that's why I think at any point you can change the relationship, the dynamic. At any point you can decide, I'm going to try. And then we're going a little bit further down, because you can ask me some questions in a minute. The last bit I want to talk about, to do with the feminine lineage, is at the point where your mother or your grandmother is now getting to the point where they are going to pass away, when you have to face death. Now, what happens is that if we're lucky to have someone in our family to die, because I hear some beautiful stories. I have a friend whose mother died recently, who was an awful mother to her daughters, but, you know, there was love there. So at the end, she literally had the best death. They were all there. They stroked her. They loved her. She said she was sorry. There was lots of cuddles, and she was about 95, and all was amazing. So there was a lot of healing that happened. But this isn't always the case. Those are the special ones that we're allowed that time where that you can do that. Sometimes we're not given that time. Sometimes you stop speaking to your mother because you have to protect yourself. Sometimes you cannot return to that relationship because it's too damaged or toxic. So there are lovely practices you can do if you cannot. So I often say to people, if you're suffering a lot and your parents are dying and you don't feel like you've made the peace that you're looking for, rather than just abandon and not look at this, because what happens, the energy still whooshes back to you and you're still carrying the crises. So there are very beautiful things you can do. You can build an altar. You can put your mother's picture on the altar. You can write her a letter to tell her how you feel, but you also can say to her, I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you. So the peace not only comes to you, the peace also goes back, all that darkness and upset. So these are really extreme relationships that have never managed to heal. And again, I want to say, you know, how often our mothers or grandmothers have learned not to heal. You know, it's always, I think it's really good if you can just go, look, do you know, I've got enough love in my heart, I can do it for them. Because what you'll do is that you'll prevent that toxic energy still coming through the family. Because remember, even if you have no children, your brother might have children, or they'll be great. So that energy will still continue. And if you can just be brave enough to say, I can stop it here, by just with an act of love, it makes such a difference.
That's beautiful. And even just the idea of that. I think the healing goes both ways too. What I've experienced myself personally is that you can even help people heal once they've passed. There's like a release for them, a sense of freedom, and it's that feeling that is then they can be like a healed ancestor rather than.
Yes. And a lot of the work that I do is beyond the grave as well. It's not just the stories from the beginning, which we do a lot of work with people to kind of heal that. But it's those that come, that have passed, that are really very upset and traumatized. And, you know, and also because of the way they died, it's the way they lived, it's their lack of contribution. You know, there's so many stories. I mean, I've got the most extreme stories, like the bodyguard of Adolf Hitler's, who was a grandfather of one of my clients. So her dad refused to acknowledge the way that they existed. So he was in New Germany, as I call it, after the war. And he changed his relationship with his children. But he said his mum, once his dad, I think his dad was executed, the mum changed her name and pretended to be somebody else. So the shame of that and the guilt and being a perpetrator is a very interesting problem, because within that, what was interesting when I did the session with her is that this grandfather I could see him pacing up and down, because he knew, and all he could say to her, he said he believed in that truth. So he himself, I'm not saying that is justified, because he wasn't a person that, to me, that felt really dark, not like some I've met God, I bet all sorts of people. You know, I've got perpetrators that enjoyed being a sociopath or murdering their wives and their children or whatever, or worked, you know, with armies and murdered people. So some people have a natural affinity with darkness, and therefore their stories are very toxic and slightly harder to navigate. But sometimes they've made mistakes, they've made choices, they've done things that they know they should never have done, taken the family's money or made choices, and then the whole family suffers. So it's easier to forgive somebody who's a victim than it is someone who's a perpetrator, but we still have to put everybody a little bit like, actually, like the Dalai Lama here, equal rights. Everyone deserves forgiveness.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting navigation when you're dealing with slightly more sinister situations.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be. As you were saying that, I just remembered that, like, my dad had passed. He's been passed for a long time now, but in the early days, he visited once, and he was very, like, not into anything as far as, you know, this kind of world. So it was a very abrupt kind of, yeah, I'm not into this, but, you know, okay, yes, I'm here. And then after he had healed, he came back to visit me, and I knew that he was very different, because he said, "I'm sorry, I was a really shit dad, wasn't I?" And just that would have been his exact verbiage of it. And he's just like, "Oh wow, okay, yeah, I was a pretty crap dad." And even actually just saying that and acknowledging it was fantastic and such a healing process for me. But then I also could sense that his healing was so profound too, because he could see, you know, that, but he tried really hard, and he was an alcoholic, and he had all these other things going on. But yeah, it's really
similar to my story as well. My father was exactly
right.
the same. But what's interesting, when they come,
Mm.
sometimes they take, I call it the 3-year mark.
Yeah, it was a while.
So sometimes they do this pivotal where he comes back and he goes, "Yeah, I was a crap dad, yeah, whatever."
Mm.
Then they go. The next time they come, you know, the 7-year and the 10-year, I've because I've worked with this work for so long, I'm a bit like Poirot. I want to work out the clues. So often, what happens, and they talk about that in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is that when they get closer, they've been dead for so long, not everybody, but some of them are very drawn into going into the light. So even if they haven't gone into the light as soon as they passed, because they've had a terrible death, or they're very angry, or they're, you know, whatever issues. So what happens is that slowly, because as I said, everybody does, you know, most people, unless they're a real dark spirit, most people begin the journey, you know, relatively all right. So you're born, you know, as a good person, generally looking for love, looking to be nurtured, looking to survive. And then gradually, as their life wakens up, they become either really dark, very unhappy, very traumatized, very addictive, or whatever. So they basically they wrap themselves into their own darkness. So often when people about to pass, I go, give them some healing, because it alleviates some of the astral energy, which is this encasement, which is like, it's like a weight. So when they pass, I'm just saying this because it's very interesting, because when they pass, often they take the weight with them. It's a relief for most family members, especially if someone's been very difficult. You go, that's better for them and for us. Slowly, what's interesting, that the more they go into the light, which means there is a place that as they rest, they begin to get better. They mend, become less fearful. The astral in them starts to soften. And this sounds like what happened to your dad. And gradually, and I've heard lots of stories that other members of the family who died before them, they slowly come to visit and encourage their change of heart. There's a lot of healing. So if he had a problem with his mum, often his mum died years ago, and he has to visit her. So there's a very interesting community that works with, in normal cases, of how to heal. Lovely. And like you and I, we feel when they return. We know they're lighter. We know they're more positive. And that's really important for the legacy of the family, but also for the legacy of their own souls as well. It's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And it was exactly as you just said, his mother had passed before, and yeah, you could see that healing as it came down, but just the feeling of the energy. It's so interesting. And I think it's so lovely for people to understand too, because it helps if you, rather than just thinking that you pass on and then you just become spirit, but to understand that healing still continues.
It's a big journey. Yeah, it's a big journey. Most people think that even when you've lost a child, And I like to talk about that because we've lost children in our family, and you know, really young children, right up to, you know, early 20s. These children that pass away, they are quite amazing. That's all I want to say to you. And I am very sorry if anyone's lost somebody, because that, to me, it's my, even now I can feel my heart getting heavy. Is the worst, to me, that's one of the worst lessons or experiences. But these kids are so amazing. So what they do, they're like angels. So often if you've lost a child, even if, you know, in utero, or, you know, or later on, these angels, I want to call them, they're so pure, they're incredible. Even the late teens, early 20s, where they've died, and some even from suicide, murder, accidents and trauma and terrible illnesses. These souls that come, when I do work with clients, they often, all they give is love and compassion, and all they want is for the family to feel safe, to really forgive that the fact that they're not there anymore, because sometimes the living family get very hurt and angry that they're not there. But I just want to say they are watching and they are sending love, and all they ever say to me, just tell them I just want them to be happy, tell them I know I'm well and safe. And often these amazing kids end up doing some amazing work in spirit, so life still, you know, so they help those. I have a friend whose daughter committed suicide. So when they're suicide, she goes and gives them basically counseling. So she goes and because she said, what a waste of a life if I'm not there to help. So she's awakened enough. So, I mean, you know, there's always an amazing, so nothing's wasted. There's always this, I call it spiritual recycling that goes on, you know, and I think, you know, families who've lost children, I'm very sad for you, but I just want to remind you that they do bring a lot of light into the family to make sure everyone's all right. I've never not experienced that.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And so helpful, because yeah, you're right. I couldn't imagine that pain. But yeah, the fact that the spirit keeps living on, I think that's so important. Yeah, that's beautiful. So where have we gone? In where are we at?
Right, we could go back to more trauma if you like, because I'm always ready for a little bit of dark excitement with this conversation, because world history is so vast and amazing, and the rise and fall of humanity is what I'm talking about here with this amazing feminine lineage. And I know we're trying to heal ourselves out some very, you know, like the conference is how do we navigate our way out of some very dark experiences, of whether it's, you know, illnesses, mental health, or spiritual darkness. You know, how do we navigate that? And I think I'd like to kind of just say, let's go now straight into who we really are, because within that's the bit of us that has the strength and the courage and the ability to heal. I think that is quite amazing. So there's so many things that you need to realize, that basically we can challenge everything that is going on in our lives if we tried. So from the worst situations, like I don't know, somebody I know had a horse accident and they're paraplegic, or, you know, or they've lost, you know, I know people whose children died in the tsunami with their husband. So, you know, you're left on your own. So these are very extreme human traumas. So there is always a way. And I always go, you know what the way is? It's about love. Find a way to love again, find a way to love yourself, find a way to kind of forgive, and that comes from love. That's the little bit of light that we have in our core that goes, I can get up tomorrow and I can continue. And I've met some amazing people who have had terrible traumas again. How do they navigate out of the time? As I always say to me, forgiveness, because, you know, you can't blame people for what's happened to you, because you could, but then you never get better, because you're always giving your power to someone else. And that's the thing that I remember my mum always saying, you know, if it wasn't for the war, then my father would still be here. My grandmother was saying, you know, so they closed their world as they got older. And in a way, if somebody chooses to do that, that has to be all right too. It's funny, you know, I've always wanting people to get better, be stronger. You can do it, you know, and sometimes people through acceptance of your family history, sometimes people can only grow that much or be that big. And again, that comes from just acceptance as well. And same as us, we need to accept as far as we sometimes want to grow, to heal, to navigate, to change. It's maybe not the right time, or you kind of need to trust that. And looking back into your family history gives you pointers of how people have managed, well, sometimes managed badly, not to repeat those, and sometimes how well they've managed, you know, surviving, immigrating, healing, you know, remarrying, changing the business, changing the dynamic, changing the money situation in families. So yes, so that's what I wanted to end with. It's like, you know, how do you want to exist? How do you heal? How do you find your strength? And sometimes how you need a bit of patience when sometimes we can't grow or be bigger than we are. And then always remember how amazing the journey's been in your family history. The last 200 years is generally all we look at. But my Lord, let's go back 1,000 and you see yourself and the way your family has traveled through so many experiences. That is amazing.
Yeah, and I actually like the fact that you did mention that it's so important to accept if you're not willing to grow either. I find that really because I mean, you know, there's so much talk about you got to heal and you got to do this, and you know, and sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just have to be where you're at, and that's okay.
Yeah, and then doing that is very good because then you give yourself time. And then you go, maybe it's not my time today. Maybe I just need to rest. Maybe I need to not try and go into this massive wellness transformation,
Right.
You know, take another, you know, ceremony, do this and that. And I'm sure I'm going to be absolutely perfect and amazing. Sometimes you're perfect and amazing without doing
in that moment. Yeah. Well, it's hard work, isn't it? I mean, it's hard. Yes. No, I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you'd kind of like to finish off with, or?
Yes, I think if we're talking from what I started about how we began.
Yeah.
What I'd really, really think is very powerful for anyone who's listening to this who suddenly feels like, wow, yeah, I need to heal my relationship with my mom. I just need to heal my relationship with my daughter, or this, you know, this family connection. What I would say is that what's gorgeous, which is what I've done in the background here, is that build yourself a little space and just put everything that you love in there. And we're talking about people too. So begin the story of take that box, because I have a box of my baby, what I call my baby pictures, right up with my brother. Go and get that box out, borrow it, photocopy it, take it from the family, and just give yourself that box of your journey. Then what you do is with that box is that whenever you're feeling in the mood, you go, it's a bit like choosing a magic card. You go in the box, you go, how am I existing? Which part of me do I need to draw out to give some healing, some love to? And then you'll be very surprised the photo that you find. And I have been amazed. Actually, there are photos that have come out of that box that I have completely forgotten. Recently, my brother and I get on very well, which is amazing considering the journey we've been on. And there's a beautiful picture, which I didn't even know I had. I am 9 and he is 6. He looks very naughty because he was very naughty. And I've got my hand on his shoulder with a very strong look in my face. And I just look at him and he looked at me and he knows I'm going to stand straight. So I thought it was very cute. So I sent it to him and I said, look how strong we were and look how naughty you were, but how much love we have for each other. And it really rewound our relationship a bit. Yeah. There is other stories as well in that. Put the pictures of your children and look at their rite of passage, their baby pictures. Look at the way that your relationship changed, good or bad. And again, photos, flowers, go to your family grave, forgive those that have come before you. All of those things, put love everywhere.
I love that. That's beautiful. And it's so powerful, really is. Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. And as you said, even though it may be difficult for some people of the family, that you might still have stuff with you don't have, it's not a matter of forgiving or accepting, as in, you know, condoning what they did. It's just a matter of loving a little bit more each time. Like it's not going to be an overnight thing, but yeah.
And loving yourself a bit more, because sometimes I know people who are going through a lot of really, really difficult relationships with their family. They might have a narcissistic mother or sociopathic father, or being very abandoned, or siblings. I've noticed there's a lot of, infighting that goes on with siblings because you're suffering the same pain, but in a different way. I always say sometimes you do need to withdraw a little bit to reclaim how you not keep throwing yourself back into the lion's den.
Yeah.
But eventually you will have to say to yourself, there is a reason why I was born into this family, and there is a reason why I need to manage this in a different way. Hating, being angry, ghosting, ostracizing, being horrible, being really upset, all those things, all you do is you feel the darkness with the darkness. Sometimes protecting yourself is love. So you say, I'm withdrawing, I'm taking time out, I will go to therapy, I will think about this differently. And then you'll find as you calm down, it's amazing how your response to these siblings, the mother, the father, is not so antagonistic. And then you'll find that they respond to you in a different way, because they can see that you're not ready. I call it ready for a punch up. I'm good for ready for a little punch up, defense punch up. You kind of create a different atmosphere. So, again, it's looking at things a little bit differently.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I think that's, what a fantastic conversation, because we've definitely covered a lot in understanding just the powers of where you've come from, and, not just immediately where you've come from, but where you've come from and how far back that goes. Yeah. And definitely the idea of remembering the strengths as well, not just all the, bad stuff that they've handed down, or the weaknesses or the challenges that, all of those strengths that, have been incredible.
Yeah, because sometimes we forget, like if we've got a mother who's clinically depressed and you think, she's an alcoholic or disappearing. I often say if you take away the response, they often will turn up the next day and be there. They will try. So even if they fail at the end, I've heard some terrible stories from some people, they tried. Most of the time, if they've withdrawn and not tried anymore and they're full of pain, always remember they were once a child.
That's right.
There's a reason why they become like this.
Yeah. And often, people are really trying to do the best they can, even if the best they can was kind of pretty crappy.
Oh yes, and that's also forgiving us as well when we do our best as parents. I'm blessed with having 3 kids. And, you're only turning up and doing the best you can as you go. That's lovely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I want to give some space for you to talk about. Now, you have a free gift for everyone, which is the workshop. Did you want to?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So basically, what we've talked about today is that I run these workshops online for people to heal their feminine lineage. So it's a lot to do with the relationship with the mother. So I've got this lovely workshop. It's 2 hours long. You get the recording. I give you my PowerPoint, so you've got some deepening exercises that you can practice. And I think, really it's a gift for the world, because the more we heal, the better the world will be. So really, that's the reason why I particularly chose that workshop as a gift. Yeah,
I love that. That's beautiful. So thank you for that. We'll have all the details on your page anyway, as to how to do that. But also
and everything. And also, I was just going to say, people get like, oh, what's she going to make me do? It's so easy. We have discussions. We do a little meditation, and I will advise you what to turn up with. And it's so, people always say, oh, it feels like it's a really hard thing to do. It's very easy. Okay. So just turn up and it will just happen.
Perfect. Okay. And if people want to find you, your website, or work with you, or what sort of other things do you have on offer?
So on the soulrescuers.co.uk website, there's lots of things. We do work with people on one-to-one, which I find some people don't want to work in workshops or in group situations. They like the private sessions. So you can read up a little bit about that. And also they're very good for, when people are going through crises that just need some support and advice. So that's great. It's not just ancestral healing work, it's therapy as well. It's spiritual therapy, I call it, where we go into the kind of behavior, the soul thing, how are you, why you are the way you are, how to navigate. So I love that. The second thing we do is all the online classes. We do a regular mindful meditation class with themes because people need I call it a little weekly hit to remind themselves to kind of, you are sane, you are well, you can manage your life. We also always do online classes because our clients are from all over the world, where you kind of top up to understand, ancestral healing and your own kind of spiritual growth and psychic development as well. And then, of course, my favorites are the retreats. We hold these all over the world, and we do about 9 a year, where you come in a small group of 16 people and you spend 4 days with us. And we do a big ancestral workshop in Cornwall in November, which is one of my favorites. So we do a lot of family work, but it's not like family constellations. It literally is, you bring your photos. We really have bigger dialogues with family members and also heal what's within you. So yes, so I'd say for the last 30 years, it sounds like I'm doing the same, one-to-ones, the online classes, the development, but it evolves, it grows, and it's so necessary. It's lovely what we do. Yeah.
Oh, it sounds fabulous. It sounds really lovely. That's so great. So you've got a newsletter and everything, so people could sign up for that and find out when all the different things are on as well.
Yeah, they can, and they can go and look me up as well. I've written about 6 books on the subject, life after death and ancestral healing and psychic development, so they can check me out that way too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Natalia. It's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you, and I know that people will have definitely resonated with what you've said and getting something out of that. I'm very grateful for your time and effort.
That's a pleasure. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you very much.
Thank
It's been wonderful to talk about this today.